Welcome back, gang. Tim here. I'll talk if you'll listen. Episode 49. Almost at 50. Almost at the big 50. And I don't have anything extravagant planned for next episode. I'm hoping I can make it worth everyone's while. And I'm hoping it'll turn out to be a good one nonetheless. But this time around, no interviews this episode. No bells and whistles. So when I say I won't keep you for too long, hopefully I can really mean that this time. So for everyone following along, you know that I've been going to therapy, and I've started couples therapy, I've started individual therapy, and there have been a lot of different things that I've come to realize and come to understand, and some other areas that even if I don't understand, I am learning to understand or trying to understand. And let me start off by saying, I know I've said it in the past, and I don't want to sound like a broken record too much here, but therapy, especially within the Black community, especially those of you, or those of us, I should say, who have come from broken homes. We have not come from a stable home. We have a single parent household, and there's been a lot of disarray in our lives growing up. I highly, highly, highly encourage, and I feel like in some areas even mandate, therapy. It is one of the best things that you can do for yourself, and I'm going to talk a little bit more as to why a little later on when I get to certain things. But therapy has been really important for me, specifically in the area of just understanding myself a little bit better, because I think it's real easy for all of us to sit back and analyze the world, but to talk about me specifically, as I fidget, as I say this, because I feel the anxiety creeping in here, learning yourself, learning about yourself, becoming more aware, becoming more introspective is really challenging. It's very challenging. It's very intimidating, but it's very beneficial. And listening to my therapist and listening to other parties just tell me things or make me aware of things or even validate other things have really come to help me. One thing in particular is what parentification is. So I had no idea what parentification was, and I'll be honest, I didn't really investigate it too much after hearing it, but one of my earlier therapy sessions, I sat down with my therapist, and as with all therapy sessions, they ask a lot about your family. What was your family like? What was it like coming from that? What was it like growing up? Or what was it like dealing with your mom, your dad, or both? And as I started to explain that, we got a little deep into my family dynamic, in particular, my siblings. So a lot of people who've known me know I don't really talk about my siblings often. And there are some people who have thought that I was just an only child. And it was huge for them to realize that, oh, wow, you have two older brothers and a little sister. Yeah, I do. We're very much estranged. I barely talk to one of them. The other two, I have no idea where they are. And I'm not necessarily proud of that, but I'm at the point now where I just don't care, because not in a malicious way, but I just don't know how to care. When you grow up around people who have always been a burden or a task or a responsibility or an item, you really can't really humanize them, or you struggle to humanize them. And on the surface, you know, like, hey, these are people, you know, they bleed just like I bleed. They have blood cells coursing through their body, and they breathe the same air I do. But I can't help but just to think of them as like periods of my life. Like, I don't really look at them as like people. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way or demeaning way. I mean that in a practical way. Like, when I think about my brothers and my sister, I think about them as like, they're like these things that like exist. Like, I have two brothers, I have a sister, but I don't look at them as like family or like, you know, my Lodge brothers, some of which who are watching now, they're my family. I can put a face to the name there. I have genuine emotion when I think of my Lodge brothers. My friends, my girlfriend, that's family. That's something I can associate with and have an emotional tie to, and as we dove into that topic and delved deeper, one of the things that came up in particular was the mental status of my siblings. So my siblings all have mental disabilities. My oldest brother has the least severe. I'm not going to, just for the sake that, just in case there's people who are listening who know my siblings, I won't get too personal. A part of me is like, I don't really care. I'm gonna be honest, but respect is respect, and I'm not going to get too deeply into it. But my oldest brother has something that's common amongst many Americans, and he's learned to deal with it, and he's learned to get past it, and now he's at a point where, to my knowledge, it doesn't really impact him that much. And he has a beautiful wife who helps him with that. My sister-in-law does a really good job of accepting, or at least seemingly accepting, his flaws and having patience and just working with him. My second oldest brother has a mental disability, and it is very challenging. I can't think, or restrictive is probably the best word I can think of. It's very restrictive, his mental disability, and although he's able to operate socially to a degree, and although he's able to maintain a working job to a degree, he has had struggles coping with his disability and accepting his disability very, very early on in life, from a child to not understanding what he had and how he got there, to a teen and a young adult, and starting to accept that his disability is a part of who he is as a person, but still trying to process it. And the most difficult thing about trying to process a mental disability is your disability may impede your comprehension level. So maybe it's not necessarily a case of being willing to comprehend. It's literally having the capability to comprehend. So that brings us to my youngest sibling, which is my little sister, the only girl of the four. And she's very autistic. This one I will be specific about. She's very autistic, severely autistic, very much high on the spectrum. She's nonverbal for the most part. And getting back to the therapy now, growing up, I expressed to my therapist how I had to take care of my sister at a very early age. We were only 3 years apart, so it's not like I had a lot of life experience in taking care of her, but I had to take care of her at a really, really early age, a very early age. And when you're a kid and you don't understand why someone can or cannot do something, and the only thing that you're being told is you have this moral obligation of protecting and caring for them, you kind of just roll with the punches. You don't really think too much about it. You just do. And in my mind, I'm following the direction of my mom. And in the Black community, and I don't want to alienate or isolate any of my audience members here, but in the Black community, especially when you're in a dense urban environment, more specifically middle class to lower middle class family, obedience is very important. And within the Black culture, disobedience is like taboo. It's like the worst you can get. It's like the worst sign of disrespect. And oftentimes curiosity gets misinterpreted as disobedience. Unfortunately, in my household, and I don't want to paint this picture of the Black community, I don't want to paint this picture of a inaccurate version of the Black community to all of my non-Black listeners out there and viewers out there. But at least what I can say in my household, it wasn't until basically the end of high school, just after high school, that I was able to question my mom's decisions. I couldn't question, hey, why is this, or where are we going, or how are we going to get there, et cetera, et cetera. So when my mom said, take care of your sister, I sat down, I shut up, and I took care of my sister, whether I wanted to or not. And a lot of that was big brother vibes. Like, you know, you wanted to branch off and you didn't want to be burdened by any of your siblings, and you kind of wanted to do your own thing. So a part of it was when I wanted to go out and hang out with my friends or play the game or take place in after school activities. And, you know, I couldn't do that because of my sister. So I view there as a burden in that perspective. But then there's another side of that too, where like, hey, I don't quite understand my sister's condition. I don't understand her situation, your situation, Mom, my situation as Tim, and our situation as a family. I don't quite understand that, but I can't ask because God forbid I'm being viewed as being disrespectful. So you kind of just, again, roll with the punches. So as I'm taking care of my sister, I'm literally doing things, some of which I would love to discuss with some of you offline, but on a platform like this, I'm not going to get too specific. But there were some things that I had to do that no older brother, 2.5-year older brother should have had to have done. And I found out through my therapist that this was called parentification. And I skipped a lot of parts mentally, the male brain in particular, but a young child's brain is literally not made up to be a parent. It literally cannot be a parent's brain. And the brain doesn't really fully develop until I think it's 25. Maybe some of my viewers can correct me on that. But the adult brain doesn't really fully mold and function until 25 years old. So here you have this 6, 7, 8-year-old, fast forward 14, 15, 16-year-old kid and teen taking care of another kid, another teen, let alone one with a disability, a severe mental disability. There were occasions where I couldn't go to school or didn't go to school because my sister, her school bus didn't come and get her. There were situations where I didn't eat because I had to feed her, make sure she ate. And this isn't a sob story to gain pity. This isn't a sob story to gain some sort of weird, twisted version of your respect. This was just me expressing that I didn't really know that parentification was a thing and how that impacted my life and my childhood. And there were certain aspects of my childhood that I didn't really get a chance to develop or experience because, again, I was so busy being a parent, so to speak. And here I am being a parent that video games were my escape. Now, here I thought that I always loved video games because I thought I loved video games for the same reason that you all like movies or you all like books or whatever. Here I am thinking that I like video games for the same reason. And lo and behold, a part of the reason that I liked video games was it was my escape. It was my go-to. I was able to run away from reality and dive into this fictional world where I was in control of my environment. I knew for the most part what to expect, and it had an ending. It could end, and then I could start over again. And that's really, really deep. And these are some of the things that you start to realize and you understand when you have someone who is trained to understand these things. Like when you go and have thoughts about yourself and you think, you know, I don't like to do this thing or this activity or commit to a relationship because I just don't like to do it. Realizing that maybe it's uncomfortable. And a lot of things that we deal with actually stem from our childhood. It stems with our relationships that we formed and the different things that we have to go through. And I think a lot of us go through so many different forms and levels of trauma that some of us don't even realize this trauma. And it took for my therapist to tell me that, no, you had a traumatic childhood. Your childhood was not normal and it was very extreme. And I can sit back and go, okay, yeah, not many people, or maybe more people than we'd like to admit, but not too many people have siblings that with mental disabilities, or, not many of us ran away from home, or, had a verbally abusive mom and things like that. Hey, I'm in the minority there. That doesn't happen often, and it takes for an outside trained source to come and tell you these things for you to get the realization of it. And the thing is, and I can only speak for what I can relate to, right? I can only speak for men, and I can only speak for the Black community. I can't really speak for anyone else, but it's so funny how we'll look at everything else and we go, hey, I want somebody with some know-how to do this thing, right? Whether it's plumbing, whether it's a mechanic for your car or your vehicle, whether it's an accountant, whether it's a teacher, whoever it is, whether they have extensive experience or they have some sort of degrees or certification. It's so funny how we want that to be a requirement when it comes to these other areas, these other important areas in our lives. But when it comes to therapy and decompressing and dismantling our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions, we just go to friends and family. We don't seek out professional help. So let me be the one to tell you that you may have experienced trauma in your life, or you may not have, and someone may have convinced you that you have. Please seek out therapy. I got 3 free sessions through my jobs and employee assistance program, and a lot of mental health services are covered through your insurance if you have insurance. Depending on how it's classified, if it's behavioral health or if it's mental health or different things. For my insurance personally, it's either a $20 copay or there's no copay at all. I don't know about you. If I can go out and order out, if I can go out and buy beer and other drinks, if I can pay for extra subscription services that I don't need, then I can pay a $20 copay 2-3 times a month, if that. So let me be your sponsor. Let me be your advocate. Let me be your liaison to therapy. Therapy is very beneficial. And I think the biggest reason a lot of people, specifically within the Black community, don't seek out therapy is because our family and our friend, like we're taught to believe that our family and our friends are our outlet. These people, this group of people, we don't need therapy. We don't need to pay. We can go right to mama or grandmama or whoever, especially the women in our lives. We talked a few episodes back about how Black women support Black men in some areas. That's one area. We're trained almost to go to your sister, to go to your aunt, to go to your mom, to go to a Black woman and unload. But hey, even if the Black woman is a therapist, go get therapy and make it a requirement to get a Black therapist if that's your twist. But go and get therapy. I was very, very adamant to make it a point to have both my individual therapist and my couples therapist to be a woman. I just wanted that nurturing touch. Some of what I'm going to get into a little bit later, but women's ability to interpret and articulate emotions are a little bit different, or let's just say way different than a guy's is, than a male's is. And I wanted that. I wanted to exploit that. Also, I have that I learned through therapy. Based on my childhood with my mother, I have a very, let's just call it particular for the sake of discussion, view towards women in general, in particular, older women who fill this matriarch role. So I wanted it to be a woman, a female therapist, to help break down some of those barriers that my mother helped me to put up. And let's be really clear, my mother helped, but I did it. We are responsible for the barriers that we put up, whether intentional or unintentional. It may not be our fault, but it is our responsibility. So with that said, here almost at the 20-minute mark, I do want to take a step back. I do want to say hello to everyone watching on Instagram, Periscope and Facebook. And I'll be back on the other side of things with the next topic. Alrighty, I'm back on the other side. And I do have some notes here. I'm trying to really get into notes, and I usually have the notes up on my screen so that way I can just click back and forth. But in the effort to try to figure out what this skipping is, and you may have heard it up until this point so far, I do sincerely and humbly apologize, everybody. You may hear skipping during the playback, and I realize that when I try to cover it up, it just ruins the audio, and I don't want to do that. So the lesser of the two evils is kind of to just leave it. And it's frustrating, and I'm trying to figure it out. I'm going to do more research during the week, but I decided like, hey, a part of the reason could be having multiple programs open at a time. So I decided to write my notes down. I also find that when I write them down, it's a little bit more natural, a little bit more organic, and I tend to remember them a little bit better. So if you do hear some shuffling of the papers, that's what it is. It's my notes. And just bear with me here as I get everything together. But therapy. So another thing that I wanted to talk about therapy, and then I kind of want to move into the male-female dynamic of stress and how it impacts our relationships. But one other thing that I realized during therapy is how men decompress. And men and women deal with stress differently. Men and women become more aware of different things while they're stressed out, and we have different outlets. So recent studies show that when men come home, their stress levels drop. And during my therapy, my therapist even mentioned that, men need an hour to come from work mode. So I know a lot of us out there complain about our commute to work, to and from, but if the longer your commute is as a guy from a mental health standpoint, the better. Even if your situation is your commute is non-existent, especially now during COVID times, or it's really, really minor, it's very, very low, then maybe you want to find a different outlet. Maybe you want to go for a walk or go for a drive or stop by somebody else's house. But it takes a while for a man to go from work mode to family mode. It takes us an hour, 60 minutes to do that. So for the women out there, as soon as your man comes home, if he seems distant, he seems disconnected, he doesn't seem to really be engaged in what you're saying, and or he's irritable. Maybe he has a short fuse, maybe he's short tempered. It's because he hasn't really fully adjusted to family life. He's dealing from the stresses of work, everything that he has to deal with at work, the things he's responsible for, the things that he has to deal with on a daily basis, the things that stress him out. And now he's coming from work to now the obligation and responsibility of being a family man. For most men, being a family man is not natural. Coming home, turning into a dad, turning into a husband, turning into a partner is not as natural. It takes a lot of time to get there. So that hour is very essential for the man to kind of like turn that on, to activate that. The way the male's mind works is we're planners, we're fixers. And we look at the situation in its entirety and we go, okay, let me prepare or plan for this thing. And that hour helps us to plan and prepare for home. Now, I know some of you out there, man or woman, depending on, your sexuality, you might be thinking, well, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to be a burden, and I don't think that's acceptable for the man to have to get ready. It shouldn't be a task. It should be natural. Well, unfortunately, we can't always have it the way we would like. And yeah, that's the ideal situation, for everything to just flow naturally and for someone to want to do everything that you want them to do, right? But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you ask, life doesn't work that way. And for the man in particular, we have to prepare for that. And when you're dealing with and coming from the stressors and stresses of work, and some of those just manifest themselves differently at home, we tend to associate them the same way. Just going back to therapy really quickly. My last therapy session, one-on-one therapy session, I was talking with my therapist about how I was starting to get stressed out. And I take a lot of pride in not being able to be stressed out. I have a lot of outlets. I have this. I have you all. I have this podcast, which, especially now that I've been doing it weekly, is a great de-stressor for me. I have my video game. I love to sit back and just decompress and playing the video game. I also have close friends who I consider family. More in particular, my female friends are really, really valuable because it's always nice to get a different perspective. The male friends are kind of usually there. How I categorize my male friends, I have the ones that are my peers, the ones that are close to my age. I use them as venting outlets. When you call and you go, oh man, you know how it is, bro. Those are those guys. I seek advice sometimes, but it's a little bit different. Then I have my lodge brothers, all who are very much older than me. Some 10, some 15, some 20 years older than me. And I go to them for like male advice. Hey, bro, you've been through this 10 times over. How do I handle this? What's the situation like? Because no man really likes to admit, and I don't mean to trigger any women listening to this, but a lot of women are the same when it comes to certain areas. So it makes a lot of sense to go to someone who has a lot of experience, especially someone you can relate to from a cultural or racial standpoint. And you go, hey, bro, can you break it down for me in a way that I can understand or digest? What should I do? And then you have your female friends who, in my opinion, as far as relationship advice goes, may be the most valuable, because someone who's not in your situation and someone who literally, scientifically thinks differently than you, they're going to tell you different things from different perspective that you aren't aware of. Here, 1 second. Let me just put my phone on Do Not Disturb. Sorry about that. So a woman literally, and I'll get into this later, a woman literally thinks different. A woman literally processes different. One of the things, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but one of the things that men don't do, but it's exploited when they're stressed out, is men are very, they're really poor at going off of facial cues and emotional cues. We literally cannot pick up on certain things. Women do that very, very well, extremely well. They're like great at it. So when I can call up a female friend and I say, hey, hey fellas, how many of you can relate to you wake up, you ask your girl something or your wife something or your romantic partner something, whatever. And, you know, later on that day, she's mad or pissed about something. And you're like, you call your bro up and you're like, man, she was just fine. She was okay. Like I didn't do anything. That's when you want to call your female friend. And whether you agree with the answer or not, it's really important for you to get that perspective because it causes you to think outside of your box. When you call your female friend up and they say, hey, maybe it's not something that you did do, it's something that you didn't do. Or, hey, maybe like, yeah, we were having dinner and, you know, she asked me if it was good and I said, yeah, it's good. And then we left it at that. And then after dinner, she was distant. She was just upset about something. Maybe that female friend goes, well, yeah, maybe she didn't feel appreciated because you didn't go into detail about the food. And even if you don't like that answer, even if you roll your eyes at that answer, it is at least a thought that you wouldn't have otherwise thought. And now you have to consider. And then maybe you can go back to your girlfriend with that, you know, and have that discussion, open it up and figure it out. And you could be completely off base. You're like, hey, this food reminded me of something in the past that got me upset. Or you said something and it got me upset because it reminded me of something. It had nothing to do with what you said necessarily. It just made me feel this way. And it might not have anything to do with you, but at least you got that different perspective. So men and women are literally different. And to go down that stressor, like, hey, women, hey, ladies, how many times have you come home and you see your partner just on the couch chilling, right? They're just on the couch chilling. And in your mind, you're thinking, damn, this person is lazy. They're just sitting there. There's so much things to do, so many different things to do around the house. There's so many different things that we got to do. We got to call 15 billion people. We got to plan this thing and do this thing and yada, yada, yada. And here this person is just sitting down in front of the TV or the game just doing. Well, that's that man's way of decompressing. A man has to flush it all out. A man he feels anyway that he's responsible for so much. There's so much that we carry on our back, some of which that we put there on our own because no one's telling us that we have to do it, but we feel like we have to do it. The pressure of being a man is immense, and we're constantly thinking about things all of the time. So we can have a thing where we don't have to think about anything other than who's at A and what my loadout is and what I want my player's stats to be. Do I want to shoot threes or slam dunks? That's peaceful. That's simple. That's something that's not a burden for us. I know a lot of people, and I don't want to pick on my same-sex couples here. I know a lot of the examples I'm giving are heterosexual couples. But hey, I'm sure it applies to your situation as well in some areas. But I know a lot of people, women in particular, can look at their partner and go, man, he values the video game, or he values his art, or he values his YouTube channel, or he values his whatever more than he values me. And that's not necessarily the case. It could be. I mean, you could have a legitimate point there. You could be right. But more often than not, it's, hey, this is my de-stressor. And I know a lot of women, a lot of men, a lot of people in relationships don't want to hear this, but sometimes you add to the stress. And that's not a blaming thing. It's not saying your fault. You're not trying to stress your partner out, but it's the reality. Your intention isn't to go outside and get into a car accident, but sometimes it happens. How do you deal with it now? And it's the same deal. Your partner can be the cause of your stress. And when you have so many other things to worry about, and when your partner isn't your peace, you need to take a step back. You need to take a step away and find your peace. And I know a lot of people out there, you want to be your peace for your partner. But sometimes you can't have it that way. Sometimes you are. But sometimes it's the video game. It's a drive. It's a good book. It's cooking. It's going over your parents' or your friend's house. Sometimes that's your peace. And we, as the other end of that partnership, we just got to deal with that and understand that, hey, this is how my partner decompresses. This is how my partner de-stresses. And I think in a really specific way, it can be really selfish to want to be your partner's everything. I think that's very selfish and very unreasonable. More importantly, unrealistic. You can't be your partner's everything. You can't be your partner's best friend. You can't be your partner's, de-stressor. You can't be your partner's go-to in every scenario. It's just not realistic. It wasn't that way before the relationship. Don't expect it to be that way during the relationship. And we're going to get into realistic and unrealistic expectations a little bit later, but it kind of made me think about why men and women bump heads so much and what we can do to better understand each other. So because this is a topic that I'm so passionate about, but more in particular, this is a topic that I can personally relate to because there have been some rocky moments, especially recently in my relationship. I would be very proud if I could sit here and say, hey, we're doing couples therapy because everything's going great and we want to keep it that way. That's not the case. Couples therapy was very reactive, but hey, better late than never, right? That said, it kind of got me thinking, hey, why do men and women bump heads so much? Why do we find ourselves in scenarios where we just have so much friction and it's just so abrasive? So I decided to do a little research for this show, and I got some feedback from Forget the name. It's killing me. I think the gentleman's name is John Gray, but he wrote this book called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. You may have heard of it. He has a PhD in psychology, and I'm reading/listening to it right now. And I'm really excited to dive deep into this. Now, full transparency here, everybody. Yes, I did want to talk about this for this episode. Yes, I am looking to help you all. But more importantly, and a little bit, selfishly, I want to just have a better situation. I want to understand why my girlfriend and I bump heads sometimes, why we have certain reactions to certain things. And this book will help me do that. And I've read certain things in the past, like love languages, and you can never just stop. The 5 love languages. You can never really just stop at one thing. And you have to be motivated to fix yourself before you attempt to fix the relationship. And sometimes just being accepting of the fact that sometimes something doesn't need to be fixed. It just needs to be understood. So that's what my goal and my approach is. And in discovering that, these different outlets, these different avenues, I came across different ways that women stress out, and some of the different ways that women need to de-stress. And one of those things is women feel like they have a never-ending to-do list. They feel like there are a ton of things that always has to be done. Now, how can I validate this from my experience? A specific example. I remember going to my barber, and my barber is a great source of knowledge. He's very wise. One would argue that he kind of has to be. Sitting in his chair for 30 to 40 to 60 minutes at a time, depending on the day. You definitely have to be engaging and wise to keep the visit entertaining. But I'm talking to him about, relationship stuff. And one time he goes to be intimate with his wife, and his wife just didn't seem near. Now, at that point, he was like, you know what? I'm going to add something, and I ain't getting none anyway at this point. So let me just go down this path. And he asked his wife, like, hey, why aren't you here? Why aren't you in the moment? Why can't you just be here with me? And she kind of unloaded on him, and she said, hey, there's so many different things I got to worry about. There's utility bills. There's, their oldest was graduating at the time, or at least going into 12th grade, and was transferring schools. There are different things that they were worrying about with transportation and school districts. And she had all these things on her mind, and she couldn't just let it go. She felt like she had all these different things to do. And he said, okay, well, what can we do? And he found that once she had a plan, even if it wasn't executed yet, the fact that there was a plan put in place to tackle these things, she felt better, and she could let go and kind of be in the moment, so to speak, and not worry about other different things. And I did a little bit of research after that, and I found that there's a certain stimuli in the brain that gets its rocks off on planning, and we get more dopamine and endorphins when we plan for something to be great and we have a plan put in place, more so than when we actually do that thing. And more in particular, that's more, what's the word I want to use? Prevalent for women. That feeling is much more intense for women. So a lot of women feel like they have a lot of different things on their plate. They have so much to worry about. They got to do this, they got to do that. How are they going to get it done? And it's difficult for them to decompress, especially when they see their partner sitting on a couch, watching TV, or playing a game. Now, when stressed out, that gets multiplied exponentially. Men, when we're stressed out, we are more acutely aware of what we need and what stresses us out. So we become much more aware of the different things that we need in our lives to improve our mood, to improve our mental state, to improve our physical state. When women are stressed out, it's the opposite. They're much more aware of everyone else's needs. And they're at the bottom of that list. They worry about what other people need. How are they going to satisfy other people? What are they going to do to make other people happy and satisfied? So as you can see, quite literally, men and women are dramatically different. And I think a part of the reason a lot of our relationships don't work out is because we don't want to recognize that. And before you can even grow to accept something, you got to recognize it in the first place. And I know me personally, just to be really honest and open with you all, that's a big area that I struggle with. My girlfriend and I are so different in so many different ways. And I'd be lying if I sat here and said I felt like that was a good thing. There are a lot of things that I struggle with, and there are a lot of challenges for me because of those differences. But understanding them comes second to recognizing them. And I'm hoping that this book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, can help me get there. I'm really excited to unpack this book, and I'll be listening to it a lot, and hopefully I can continue this topic in the future and have you all give me some feedback on what you think. So the comment section is starting to buzz a little bit, so I am going to take a small break, check up on my viewers, and I'll be right back. All right, everybody, I'm back. Sorry that break was, I know you may not hear it because all you heard was one commercial, but it was a little bit longer than normal on my end because the chat is popping. I'm getting some great engagement from friends and from family. And this time I literally mean family. And the feedback has been great. So I will say that I would love to invite everybody to come check me out. And I realize I'm doing you guys a bit of a disservice. So I didn't really expand on Periscope. And I think I might be trying a new medium. So I might be switching again. But for the time being, so I do these on Facebook Live, and I've been doing these since like episode 36 or something like that. I've been going on Facebook Live. So if you're a friend of mine on Facebook, you've been sharing and you've been watching and you've been tuning in, no problem. But I understand that Facebook, unlike my Twitter and unlike my Instagram, I keep a little bit more close to breast. So if you are a listener of the show, but I don't know you personally, you might be thinking, well, hey, how am I going to view your videos if I'm not Facebook friends with you? Well, I stopped doing these on Instagram, so you might be thinking the same thing. I can't watch you on Instagram anymore. I decided to do it on Periscope, and Periscope is owned by Twitter. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see that you'll be able to watch these videos live. Now, Tim, why'd you go to Periscope instead of Instagram Live? Well, Facebook Live is awesome because it gives you a 2-hour or 120, actually longer than 2 hours, I want to say, video duration. And Periscope does the same thing. I think it gives you about a 2-hour video duration. Instagram video only gives you 60 minutes. And as you all know, sometimes my podcast can be a little bit lengthy and Instagram will cut me off. So that means I'll have to stop it and start a new one. And it's just a nightmare for editing and it could be a bit of a task. So I decided to move on over to Periscope, but someone actually reached out to me. And this is why I'm so grateful for everyone making the podcast so successful. It's not just me, it's you all too. But someone actually reached out for me from another platform called Podbean. So it was their marketing director. They reached out to me and they want me to start streaming on their network. So, or their platform, I should say. So I'm going to do a little bit of investigation. I'm going to check that out. A part of me doesn't want to leave Periscope because I just started. You can't really build anything if you leave halfway through construction, right? So yeah, no one's really that engaged on Periscope. A lot of people watch the videos after it's posted, and I get much more engagement on Facebook Live. But at the same time, if Podbean can give me more tools for you all to be more or have better access, I'm going to go over to Podbean. So I'm going to do some research to that, and I'll be sure to share that information. I'm also going to start sharing my Periscope info in the description. But quite honestly, if you click on my Twitter, you'll have access to Periscope. Anyway, going back to the topic at hand. So, As I did a little bit more research on men and women and how we're different and what we stress about, what we don't stress about, how we decompress, how we communicate, it kind of got me very excited because I started seeing certain things from a psychological standpoint. For example, one thing that I came across is men can rationalize any and everything when they need to rest. So if a man has to rest, he'll sit down and rationalize what he can do to get to that point. What can he do to rest? Okay, I got to do X, Y, or Z. Women, on the other hand, are a little bit opposite. They just want to know that everything can be taken care of before they rest. Doesn't necessarily have to be completed. It just has to have we talked about it a little bit earlier before the break, right? Just got to have a plan in place. As long as it's taken care of, you don't have to stress about it. You can decompress a little bit. Men tend to pull away from a lot of emotional confrontation. Men tend to pull away, take a step back, and they think to themselves about what's bothering them or about how they feel. Newsflash, men aren't great at dealing with emotions. You can blame it on our environment. You can blame it on our race, depending on your race. You can blame it on our culture, depending on where you came from. You can blame it on society. You can blame it on our perspective of the world and how the world perceives us. We aren't great at dealing with, processing, reading, or handling emotions. So in order to do that, we can't do that in a moment. It's not as reactive. We need to think a lot. I know when my girl and I have difficult conversations, or even not so difficult conversations, there are long periods of silence before I respond. I need to think about how I feel. I need to think about how she'll feel when I say something. I need to think about what the long-term effects are, et cetera, et cetera. Men tend to pull away. We kind of shut down. Ladies, how many of you know your father, your brother, your boyfriend, your husband, your coworker, your boss to shut down? They don't talk about what's bothering them. They're thinking about it. They pull away and they think about it. One of the biggest challenges that men go through is vulnerability. We struggle with being vulnerable because we don't like how it feels. It's uncomfortable for us. It takes us out of our comfort zone. And we struggle with becoming vulnerable because we don't know how to be vulnerable. We don't know what that language sounds like. We don't know what that body language looks like. Should I sit down? Should I stand up? Should I move closer and hold your hand? Should I back away and maintain eye contact? What should I do? Men struggle with these things, and we need patience and education to get there. And that's another reason why therapy is so important. Women, on the other hand, are much more willing to share their thoughts, even if these are thoughts that aren't necessarily relative to the situation. Even if these are thoughts that aren't necessarily impactful, they feel the need to share, to express. And when women don't see that reciprocated, naturally, they perceive that as an unwillingness to, instead of being incapable. My girlfriend and I, last week, I want to say, got into a discussion about big surprise, sharing feelings. And she felt a certain kind of way because I'm so quick or so comfortable in sharing feelings with other people, whether I get on this podcast and share or whether I speak to my friends and share. And sharing with her regarding certain topics was a challenge for me. And I didn't stop to think to consider that it bothered her so much. So that's on me. I'll take accountability there. But one thing that the biggest takeaway from that discussion was, hey, I don't know how to. And I know when you don't have an answer and you don't have an opportunity to talk about it, the biggest thing to think about is you don't want to do this thing. Again, like I talked about earlier, we it gets perceived as an unwillingness to. You don't want to share with me. You don't like sharing with me. And it was a very difficult conversation, and we came out of it knowing like, hey, well, let's consider the fact that I don't know how to. So for everyone listening, and for those of you who don't know, this is the longest relationship I have ever been in. Even coming down to the fact that I live with the person I'm in a relationship with. I never had to worry about being open and honest and vulnerable with my partner before because I never got that far. I never got to that point. It was over before it started. And now I'm in a situation that's not like my previous romantic ones. And this person wants to know and see that side and experience that side of me. So again, ladies and fellas, again, depending on your orientation, it may be really easy to sit back and look at a guy and go, hey, he does not want to share with me. But I urge you, I implore you to consider, maybe he does not know how to share with me. So all we ask is for a little patience, a lot of tolerance, and some growth. Maybe change the way you ask questions. Maybe change the way you listen. Maybe change the way you view us in certain areas. That'll be really, really helpful. Now, as I turn the page here, or wait, actually one more point on this same page. I even had to dive into how men feel appreciated, how women feel appreciated. So again, all of this is from the same author. Again, I believe his name is John Gray, but he's the author of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And I'm so excited to read more into his work. But one of the things that he talked about was the need to feel appreciated and how men feel appreciated and how women feel appreciated. So women feel appreciated when they feel cherished. Men feel appreciated when they feel needed. When a woman sees that their partner cherishes them, or even their kids, how many moms out there don't feel appreciated by their kids? Now, I know a lot of people listening, and I'm going to say this as many times as I need to, and my goal is to get on your nerves. You're going to have people out there who goes, that's not me. Just because it doesn't apply to you doesn't make it untrue. And if it doesn't apply to you, at least sit back and become educated in the sense that it could apply to someone you know. But for many of us, this is very realistic. This is very reasonable, and you can relate to it. So again, how many moms, how many, aunts, how many grandmothers out there feel unappreciated by their kids? How many partners, how many girlfriends, how many wives out there feel unappreciated by their partner, by their husband, by their wife? How many workers out there, nurses, electricians, doctors, social workers, chefs? How many of you feel unappreciated by your boss? Women feel appreciated when they feel cherished. Now, I know what I'm going to do is look up the definition of cherish. I mean, a lot of us presume we know what certain words mean. So look up the definition of cherish. Look that up. See what that means, right? Maybe look up some videos. See how cherishing looks. See how it sounds. Ask your partner, hey, what does being cherished mean to you? What does that look like to you? Or, hey, what makes you feel appreciated? And then try your best to pursue that. Way easier said than done, I know. But the first step is the hardest step, right? Men feel appreciated when they feel needed. Ladies, and again, men, depending on your relationship, when you tend to do everything on your own, when you don't ask for help, when you do things that doesn't require the male's involvement, when you tackle a task or project and you don't ask for input or help. Something as simple as opening the pickle jar. Something as complicated as building something, mapping something out, building a budget. A man feels appreciated when he feels needed. One thing that I think my girlfriend knows but won't ever truly understand is how good it makes her dad feels when she's still calling him. So very much her entire life, and even her siblings' entire lives, were very dependent on her dad, on their father. And when someone's used to being needed all the time, and more specifically when they're a man, and now all of a sudden you have your daughter in the care of another man, you have your daughter away from the household, you literally have no authority now, for the most part, over your daughter. When that phone rings and your daughter is like, hey, Dad, I need you. What type of drill bit is this thing for? Or, hey, Dad, I need you. I blew a fuse. Or, hey, Dad, I need you to take me to Lowe's and get this thing. That makes the man feel appreciated. And a man could really, I'm not going to say could care less, but doesn't care as much about being cherished. We just want to be needed. And those are similar in some areas, but different enough to define the experience. So that was very insightful for me. Now turning the page. So the last point I want to make here, then I'm going to let you all go actually, is my perspective versus other people's perspective, right? So when you sit down and you go your perspective on like what a relationship is supposed to look like, what it's supposed to sound like, you have these expectations, and we don't have any outside source giving you information, or you only go to similar sources. Like you go to people who grew up the same way you did. You go to people who are dating the same type of person you're dating, or living in the same area, the same financial bracket, whatever the case may be. You're going to get similar answers, and in your mind, that's going to normalize your situation. You're going to think your situation is normal. Every situation is like this, right? So I attempted to look up some things that kind of with the hope to get more perspective. So I'm hoping this helps you all out. This will be really, really quick. And then I'm going to let you all go. So I looked up at a study. There was a study that the University of Pennsylvania, shout out to UPenn, that they did recently, and even going as far back to 2014. And this Stanford also did a similar study where the Stanford study was 1,500 men and women. And UPenn didn't disclose what their numbers were, or at least I didn't see it. But they did some research on men and women and got different things. So here are some of the things that 1,500 men and women responded to when they asked what makes a relationship work, right? A lot of people Google search what doesn't make a relationship work? What makes a relationship fail? You know, why are relationships unsuccessful? I decided to Google what makes relationships work. And again, this research study had 1,500 people respond to that question. So there was a list of like 10 different things I want to say, 10 plus we'll say. I pulled the top 5, at least the 5 that I thought were important, the 5 that I thought were cool. So the first point that I thought was cool was being together for the right reasons. So some of the wrong reasons it listed was pressure from friends or family. And I know a lot of you all can relate to that. You have family down your ear. When are you going to get married? When are you going to have a boyfriend? When are you going to have a girlfriend? When are you going to give me some grandkids? Right? That kind of pressure. You see other pressure. Oh, so-and-so is in a relationship. What about you? What about you? What are you doing? Another point that came up for a wrong reason, feeling alone or like a loser because you're by yourself. So because you don't want to be alone and because you don't want to get viewed as like lame or the ugly duckling, you go out and get a relationship. So you kind of force one, or you find yourself being in one that doesn't necessarily fit you, but you don't want to be alone. God forbid, right? So you stick in that relationship. Being together for image, another wrong reason. Maybe you are in the public eye. We see this a lot with politicians and celebrities. Sometimes I sit back and think, I wonder how many politicians hate their husband or wife. But a divorced politician doesn't make well for a good campaign. So you stick it out. Thinking love will solve everything. Another wrong reason. I'm in love with this person, or we love each other, so that's enough to fix everything. You can't fix a hole in the wall with love. That's pretty much what it is. Those reasons really jumped out at me. And in some areas, I can definitely relate to that. The second thing that jumped out to me. Have a realistic relationship. This is the thing that keeps relationships together, having a realistic relationship. And we talked about this a little bit before when I said you need to have realistic expectations. And we need to realize what makes something realistic. Love is also a decision. It's not just a feeling. You have to decide to love someone. You have to decide to be there through thick and through thin. And you have to decide to understand, or want to understand, having the willingness to understand that it's not just going to come and be all sunshines and, roses and unicorns. It's going to be some tough times. The author of the book that I'm reading right now, again, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. He got into the first chapter. He talks about a story about how he got into a confrontation with his wife. When things started to get a little bit heated, he turned towards the door to leave. His wife turns and says to him, "Please don't leave. I need you here." And she said, "You can't only be around during the good times. I need you when I'm in pain too." And that was a wake-up call for him. I can tell you it's definitely a wake-up call for me, especially due to a recent experience. And even when you don't know what to do, fellas, the fact that you're there can mean the world to your partner. And that's something that definitely jumped out to me. Again, love is a decision. It's not just a feeling. The third thing that makes relationships work. Out of the 1,500 people, a lot of them expressed what makes relationships work, what makes relationships fail. And the people in charge of this research study saw that the majority of the people who talked about their divorce and said the reason for their divorce was communication. So everyone who got divorced said that communication was the biggest reason that they got divorced. And that may be true. But again, we're not trying to figure out what you didn't have and why you got divorced. We want to see what you had or have that caused the relationship to be fruitful. And everyone who was still together for 20, 30, 40 years said that respect trumped communication. Now, it's one thing to read this and say to yourself, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense." It's another thing to read it and go like, "No, that's not true." But take a step back and really think about that. Respect. What is respect? What does it look like? What does it sound like? How does it feel? Respect is an act. Respect is also an emotion. And if you don't respect what the other person is saying, it doesn't matter how great their communication is. You don't respect it. You don't respect them. You don't respect their perspective. One challenge for me is respecting certain viewpoints from people who didn't necessarily go through what I went through. I think a lot of people listening right now can relate to that. It's tough to take advice from someone who doesn't have kids and you have kids. It's tough to take advice from someone who is in a relationship and you're not, and vice versa. It's tough to take advice from someone who has both parents and you have one or none. It's tough. It really, really is. But when you respect the person, sometimes it makes it a little bit easier to respect what they're saying. because you respect them. And again, communication is very important. Top 5. And in fact, I will argue top 2. But we all know what's number 1 right now is respect. And I could take a step back and agree with that. I think that's true. If you don't respect what the person is saying, the communication goes right out the window. The 4th thing, a relationship is a sum of all of its parts. A healthy relationship is healthy individuals. Now, I can take a little bit of pride in this, knowing that I discovered this very recently. So I kind of stuck my chest out a little bit when I'm like, hey, I know that. That's one of my philosophies, right? But that's something I've only recently discovered in the past few months or so. Before we started couples therapy, my girlfriend and I agreed that we needed to take therapy one-on-one on our own. You can't have a healthy relationship if only one person is healthy in that relationship. A lot of us have things going on. We have had difficult childhoods. We have had difficult relationships. Some of us have PTSD or have gone through severe trauma. We need to get that in order before we commit to somebody else. If you got 2 bad apples coming into an orchard, what do you think is going to happen? If you have 1 bad apple, that good apple, that ripe apple is going to rot. It is what it is. Sometimes common sense is the best sense. A relationship is a sum of all of its parts. Recognize the fact that you're not perfect and you never will be perfect, but understand what your challenges are and try to work towards those things and get better. I can tell you this, whether it's a romantic one or a platonic one, if only one person is attempting to fix the relationship, if only one person wants to improve themselves, if only one person wants to have a productive conversation, and we just talked about it, if only one person respects the other person, that relationship is doomed. It's destined to end. And it may not end in a nice way. Both people have to be committed. Now, we can talk about different motivation levels, and maybe your motivation is at an 8 and that other person's at a 5. That's a different discussion. But that other person's motivation is at a 0. I think that's an entirely different problem. Someone who doesn't want to work on themselves, someone who doesn't take a step and look at themselves and go, what are my areas of opportunity? What are my areas of weakness? How can I improve those? How can I get better? If a person doesn't have that in them, 1, you can't force them to have that. And 2, the relationship ain't going to be all it's cut out to be. So that really jumped out at me. And finally, again, this list was really, really good. So it was really difficult for me to pull 5 things off of the list. But finally, relationships are dynamic. One thing that I struggled with personally is having these expectations that you said this, so this is what we're going to do. My girlfriend at times does a really good job of saying, well, hey, 2-3 years ago, you said this. I do a really good job of going, well, you said this, so I didn't do that. Relationships are really dynamic. And once we understand that, once we accept that it's okay for people to change their minds, it's okay to not want to go to that restaurant anymore. Hey, but it was your favorite restaurant, or that's your favorite, you love to go there. Well, not anymore. That's okay. Relationships are dynamic. They constantly change. I think one thing that we don't really realize whenever we get into a relationship with another person is if we were single, or not even if we were single, but if we take a look at a maturity standpoint, we'll be quick to say how we're not the same person that we were X amount of years ago. If you ask me what my priorities now at 30 years old, I would tell you that they're definitely different at 20 years old than they were at 20 years old. They are different than they were at 25. My priorities now and what I'm looking for a job is different from at 16. At 16, I just wanted a job. I just wanted to go to the movies. I just wanted to be able to take a girl out and I just wanted to have some money in my pocket so I didn't always have to rely on my mom. At 30, I'm looking at 401ks. I'm looking at insurance. I'm looking at benefits. I'm looking at promotional opportunities. Now, why didn't I care about that at 16? I didn't have the life experience to care about that. So why can't we take a step back and look at it from that perspective, but we can't do that in our relationships? Why can't we sit here and go, hey, time has gone by. We haven't been in relationships for 6 months or 8 months. We've been in relationships for years. Why can't we sit here and go, hey, I was this way when we first started dating, but I'm not that way anymore? And why do we have such a difficult time in confronting that? We grow, we change, we evolve. In some cases, we devolve. We need to confront that and recognize that so we can deal with that. We need to stop criticizing our partners when they change. We need to stop criticizing our partners when they change their minds. People change. The one constant thing in life is change. Why do we get so upset or surprised or shocked when it happens in a relationship? Some of us don't like change. I understand that. But this is one of those things where you got to get on the ball or get going. But those things really, really, really help me out. Now, like I mentioned, I looked up the reasons that they didn't work out either, and I'm going to go through these really quickly, then I'll let you go. Some reasons that relationships don't work out. People have a relationship checklist. In their mind, a relationship has to be done in this amount of time and in this order, and they have to do these things. When they don't do these things, the relationship is unsuccessful. Some people need to be in a relationship at 6 months. Some people need to be married after X amount of years of time. A ring on your finger won't fix your problems. Some people are overly critical. They criticize and critique everything. That can only really lead to one person being dominant and the other person being submissive, and not the fun kind of way. Some people don't deal with jealousy well. Some people have an adverse reaction to good news. Some people may not be as social and have a lot of friends. So when they come home and say, hey, I made a new friend, your partner reacts abruptly and they react in an angry way. Yeah, that's not good. If your partner doesn't deal well with jealousy, or they're really jealous, that's a red flag, to say the least. Honesty isn't important. Some people feel like, hey, I got a lie to keep you happy, then so be it. We all know that that's not great. Some people are constantly blaming and or not taking accountability. Now, this area was probably my favorite. If you're constantly blaming someone for a situation, this happened because of you. This didn't happen because you did or didn't do this thing. And you struggle with accountability. You know what? I'm sorry. You know what? That's my fault. You know what? Here's what I was thinking when I did that. I'm sorry I didn't think about this. Or, hey, I just need your patience. This is one of the areas I'm weak in. This is one of the areas of opportunity that I find challenging. I'm sorry if I'm not up to par with this yet. That's what accountability sounds like. And if you're in a relationship with the other person that has a problem of admitting when it's their fault, or admitting that it was their responsibility to take care of something, that's another red flag. Some people are emotionally immature. We talked a little bit about that already. We're not talking about the emotional roadblocks, like where some people feel like, hey, I just don't know how to do this thing. We're talking emotional immaturity, like everything has to be an argument or everything has to be a point of contention. Those people, if you're not going to work with them and if they're not willing to work with themselves, again, another red flag. Some people are controlling and manipulative. A lot of us have these in platonic relationships as well. A part of the reason I had such a funny relationship with my mother is because she was very controlling and very manipulative. And that unfortunately stuck with me even to this day. So another red flag. And finally, my second favorite behind accountability, setting a fictional lifestyle. A lot of people in relationships live in this fantasy world, this fictional thing, and they don't know how to confront reality. And when you don't confront reality, it can turn into a really destructive situation. Some people don't realize who they're really dating because they put on this front or this facade to impress everyone and everything around them, that they start to become another person. They're not the person that they believe themselves to be. And now you don't know who you're dating. You don't know who you're married to. You don't know who you're in a romantic relationship with. And I think this is one of the primary reasons that people fall off, is they try to be away, and the person that they're in a relationship slowly starts to realize that, like, you know what? You're not the person that I fell in love with. You're not the person that I liked. You're not the person that I became attracted to in the first place. Now, a lot of that is peeling back the onion, getting to know the person you're in a relationship with. But again, some of it is that person living a fictitious lifestyle and setting up this fantasy. Who are you really? And who are you really dating? So that's it, everybody. I know I kept you long. And this is one of those topics that I was really, really into, really passionate about, and more in particular, I can relate to. I'm living it personally. The Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus book, I didn't just download that and listen to it for today's episode. I downloaded it for me. I downloaded it for us, my girlfriend and I. So, if for nothing else, if the one thing you can take from this episode, let me at least say this. Be coachable. You are not always right. If you can take a step back and look at any situation that didn't quite go your way. You didn't get that promotion. You didn't get that job you wanted. You didn't get to go on that vacation or that trip. You didn't get the girl or guy of your dreams. It's real easy to say that the world is out to get you and it's the other person's fault. It's women, it's men, it's the white man, it's the job, it's the industry, it's because you don't have a degree. It's really easy to sit back and say these things. But at what point will you sit back and say it's you? With that said, everybody, I'm going to let you go and get some sleep or enjoy the rest of your day, depending on when you listen to this. And as always, I'll see you for episode 50. I'll keep talking if you'll listen. Take care.